David's prayer for when the wicked prosper: fret not yourself because of evildoers. Be not envious of wrongdoers, for they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Psalm 37 presents commands: fret not yourself because of evildoers, and also provides the results of following the commands. Fret not yourself because the wicked will soon fade like the grass. Trust in the Lord and do good, and delight yourself in the Lord. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. The psalm repeatedly contrasts the fate of the righteous. They shall inherit the land, with that of the wicked. Summary of David's prayer. David's prayer regarding the prosperity of the wicked addresses the frustration and confusion that arises when the wicked seem to thrive while the righteous suffer. David encourages patience, trust in God's ultimate justice, and a commitment to righteousness. He reminds believers that the wicked success is fleeting and warns against envy or resentment, urging them to focus on God's promises and provision for the faithful. In the end, David reaffirms that God will uphold the righteous and bring justice to the wicked, even if it's not immediate. David's prayer, often referred to as his reflections on the prosperity of the wicked. This psalm is not labeled with a specific event in David's life, but it's generally considered to have been written in his later years. The psalm reflects a seasoned perspective, drawing on his life experience to offer wisdom on trusting in God's justice, even when it seems like the wicked are thriving. David encourages believers to avoid envy and anger over the success of the wicked, focusing instead on trusting the Lord, doing good, and delighting in God's faithfulness. This theme aligns well with the advice of someone who has lived through many trials and observed how life unfolds over time, making it likely that David wrote this psalm when he was older and more reflective about God's ways. Fret not yourself because of evildoers. Fret not yourself because of evildoers resonates with the theme of patience and trust in God's justice, especially when faced with the seeming prosperity of the wicked. This psalm, attributed to David, speaks directly to the frustration and dismay that the faithful may feel when they see wrongdoing and injustice going unpunished. In response, David offers guidance on how to maintain peace and faith in God's eventual justice. Here are some ways David's prayer for patience and peace when the wicked appear to succeed. 1. Trust in God's timing. David encourages believers to avoid resentment or envy, reminding them that the prosperity of the wicked is temporary. He counsels that God's justice may not be immediate, but it is inevitable. For they shall soon be cut down like the grass and wither as the green herb. This passage suggests that the wicked success is like grass, which flourishes briefly before withering away, symbolizing the fleeting nature of their prosperity. 2. Call to patience and faith. David's instruction to fret not is a call to patience and a steady heart, trusting that God is sovereign. In verses 3 to 5, he encourages believers to trust in the Lord and do good, as well as commit your way to the Lord. This emphasizes that one's focus should be on righteousness and faithfulness, even in the face of apparent injustice. Rather than becoming embittered, believers are encouraged to take refuge in the hope that God is just. 3. Promise of justice for the righteous. David's prayer reassures that, while the wicked may appear to prosper, those who remain faithful will ultimately inherit blessings and peace. Those who wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth, a promise that those who remain steadfast will be rewarded in ways the wicked will not experience. This promise underlines a deep trust that God's rewards are far more enduring than any earthly prosperity. 4. A contrast between righteousness and wickedness. The psalm draws a distinction between the fleeting success of the wicked and the enduring inheritance of the righteous. David emphasizes that God is aware of the actions of all, and though the wicked may momentarily seem to prevail, their future is bleak. Conversely, the righteous will find God's support and provision over the long term. 5. A call to peace over wrath. Speaks to letting go of anger and forsaking wrath, as it only leads to harm. David sees resentment and wrath as unnecessary burdens for those who trust in God. His prayer is not for the punishment of the wicked out of personal desire, but rather a call for the faithful to lay down any sense of revenge or anger, leaving justice in God's hands. In sum, fret not yourself because of evildoers serves as a reminder to remain steadfast in faith, to resist envy, and to rest in the assurance that God will enact justice in His own time. David's prayer reflects a deep confidence that the righteous will ultimately experience peace, whereas the wicked will fade away. This message offers both comfort and a call to live a life centered on trust, patience, and enduring hope in God's promises. Be not envious of wrongdoers. Be not envious of wrongdoers aligns closely with David's broader message in his prayer concerning the prosperity of the wicked. In his psalm, David addresses the complex feelings that arise when those who do wrong appear to flourish, and he advises believers not to let envy or frustration take root in their hearts. Here's how "be not envious of wrongdoers" connects to David's prayer and his approach to dealing with the apparent success of the wicked, rejection of worldly standards of success. Envy often comes from comparing oneself to others, especially when it seems they are enjoying advantages that we desire. David's prayer reminds the faithful that the prosperity of wrongdoers is temporary, and that God values righteousness over worldly success. This highlights the principle by saying, "Better is the little that the righteous has than the abundance of many wicked." This verse suggests that true wealth is found in godliness, not in material gain obtained by unethical means. Understanding the fleeting nature of wicked prosperity, David explains that the prosperity of the wicked is short-lived, and it's not worth the envy. He notes, "The wicked will perish. The enemies of the Lord are like the glory of the pastures. Like smoke, they vanish away." David's words encourage a long-term perspective, recognizing that while wrongdoers may seem to succeed now, their gains will ultimately come to nothing. The imagery of smoke here powerfully illustrates the emptiness and transience of their achievements. Focus on righteous living. Instead of envying wrongdoers, David advises the righteous to trust in the Lord and do good. His focus is on living according to God's will, confident that God will provide and bless those who remain faithful. David's message is about keeping a disciplined focus on living rightly, as this leads to a peace and joy that material wealth or power cannot provide. The act of doing good is a powerful way to combat envy because it redirects energy from comparing oneself to others toward actively contributing to God's purposes. Acceptance of God's sovereign justice. Envy can stem from the desire to see immediate fairness, yet David's prayer repeatedly calls for patience. He advises believers to be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him, further emphasizing that God's justice may not be immediate, but it is assured. This trust in divine timing helps to dissolve envy, as it reassures the believer that, ultimately, God will set things right. By relinquishing any desire for vengeance or envy, the faithful are able to experience inner peace. The blessings awaiting the faithful. David reassures the faithful that while wrongdoers may enjoy temporary gains, the righteous are promised lasting rewards. He says, "The meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace." This is a reminder that God's promises are true and that the faithful will inherit blessings that far surpass anything gained through wrongdoing. The promise of an abundant peace serves as an encouragement to keep one's heart free from envy, focusing instead on the deeper fulfillment that comes from a life rooted in faith. Invitation to a higher perspective. David's counsel to avoid envy invites believers to adopt a divine perspective. He urges them to view life beyond the immediate, recognizing that God's values often run counter to human standards of success and failure. By fostering trust in God's justice and timing, David's prayer helps to lift the believer above temporary disappointments and frustrations. In essence, "Be not envious of wrongdoers" is more than just an encouragement to avoid jealousy. It's an invitation to embrace a higher standard of living that seeks God's approval above all else. David's prayer calls the faithful to place their focus on God's promises and to trust in His ultimate justice, leaving no room for envy or resentment. This perspective brings peace and fulfillment, reassuring believers that, even when the wicked prosper temporarily, God's justice will prevail in the end. For they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. For they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb, uses a vivid metaphor to emphasize the transient nature of the prosperity of the wicked. In David's prayer about the prosperity of the wicked, this phrase underlines the short-lived success of those who live unjustly, in contrast to the enduring rewards of the righteous. Here's how this line deepens the themes in David's prayer about wickedness and prosperity. The temporary nature of wicked prosperity. David compares the wicked to grass and green herbs that quickly fade. This imagery illustrates the fleeting nature of wealth or success gained through wrongdoing. Just as grass may flourish for a short season before withering, the prosperity of the wicked has a similarly brief lifespan. David's prayer encourages the faithful to see beyond appearances and to recognize that such success will not last, urging them not to be troubled by it. An encouragement to patience. The line, "they will soon fade," provides a comforting assurance that the apparent advantages of the wicked are not worth envying because they are temporary. David's prayer calls the faithful to patience, reminding them that, though God's justice may seem delayed, it is certain. The metaphor of grass and herbs that quickly wither suggests a seasonal cycle, hinting at the inevitability of divine justice in God's timing. Contrast between the wicked and the righteous. David frequently contrasts the fleeting prosperity of the wicked with the lasting inheritance promised to the righteous. While the wicked are like grass that fades, the righteous are described as inheriting the land and living in peace. This contrast reinforces the value of living in alignment with God's will, showing that only a life rooted in righteousness has lasting significance. Focus on eternal values over temporal gains. By likening the wicked to fading grass, David emphasizes the importance of focusing on eternal values. Worldly success and power may look attractive, but they lack permanence and depth. David's prayer invites the faithful to focus on a life grounded in godly principles, which leads to spiritual and eternal rewards. This perspective shifts attention from earthly status or possessions to lasting peace and fulfillment in God. God's sovereign justice in nature. David's use of natural imagery, grass and herbs, also serves as a reminder that God's justice is woven into creation. Just as seasons change and grass withers, the prosperity of the wicked is subject to a natural cycle under God's control. This metaphor subtly reassures the faithful that the world is governed by divine order, even if that order is not immediately visible. Encouragement to persevere in righteousness. David's prayer ultimately encourages believers to persevere in righteousness, trusting that their faithfulness will yield greater rewards than any temporal gains could offer. The metaphor reminds the faithful not to be swayed by the short-lived success of wrongdoers, but to stay committed to a godly path. In doing so, they align themselves with the enduring promises of God rather than the fleeting illusions of worldly power. Invitation to rest in God's assurance. This verse brings a comforting sense of God's control over the seeming injustice of the world. David's prayer implicitly encourages believers to let go of anxieties over fairness or balance in this life, trusting instead that God's design for justice is certain. The natural cycle of grass and herbs fading reminds the faithful that God's wisdom is at work, bringing everything to its rightful end. In summary, "For they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb," serves as both a warning and a comfort. A warning to those who may be tempted by the fleeting allure of wicked success, and a comfort to the faithful that God's justice will prevail. David's prayer is a call to patience, faith, and a perspective rooted in eternal values, affirming that those who remain steadfast in righteousness will ultimately be rewarded with enduring peace and joy. Trust in the Lord and do good. David's prayer for when the wicked prosper encourages us to trust in the Lord and continue doing good, even when the righteous seem to struggle and the wicked appear to thrive. This psalm addresses the age-old question of why evil people sometimes seem to flourish, while those who strive for goodness face hardship. David specifically emphasizes trusting in God, doing good, delighting in the Lord, and committing our ways to Him. Each of these actions serves as a remedy to envy and discouragement when witnessing the success of the wicked. David reminds us that God's justice is not always immediate or visible, but is assured. Here's a closer look at how each aspect is significant in David's prayer. Trust in the Lord and do good. David's first instruction is to place unwavering faith in God and live righteously. Trusting God acknowledges His sovereignty and timing. By continuing to do good, we participate in God's purpose and reflect His goodness, regardless of others' actions or success. This dual instruction to trust and act aligns with the belief that God sees and rewards the heart committed to goodness and integrity. Delight yourself in the Lord. David encourages finding joy and fulfillment in God's presence rather than in worldly gains. When our delight is in God, our desires align with His will, shaping us to seek righteousness over material prosperity. This leads to a deeper spiritual satisfaction that transcends temporary, earthly measures of success. Commit your way to the Lord. Commitment here implies entrusting our life's direction and decisions to God. This means leaving our anxieties, frustrations, and desires for justice in His hands, knowing He will act in His timing. This act of surrender helps relieve the burden of resentment and impatience by allowing God's wisdom to govern our paths. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently. David calls for patience and silence before God, a countercultural response to the frustration of seeing the wicked prosper. Patience here isn't passive. It's an active trust that refuses to retaliate or respond with envy. Instead, it's a peaceful waiting, grounded in the knowledge that God's justice will prevail. David's prayer thus reassures the faithful to focus on God's promises rather than the apparent success of those who act unjustly. It reminds us that ultimately, God's justice is certain, and He will establish the righteous. The focus on doing good in the face of opposition speaks to the resilience of faith and the trust that God's timing and righteousness will reward those who stay the course. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. David's instruction to dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness is a profound call to cultivate trust in God by finding stability and purpose where we are, even when faced with the prosperity of the wicked. This verse is part of David's encouragement to stay committed to God and live a faithful life amid the apparent success of those who do wrong. Here's how each part of this instruction provides guidance in challenging times. Dwell in the land. To dwell implies settling in a place with a sense of contentment, rootedness, and peace. David urges us to remain present and grounded where God has placed us, even when we might feel discouraged by the success of those who act unjustly. This instruction discourages escapism or envy-driven restlessness. Instead of being preoccupied with the prosperity of others or wishing for different circumstances, we're encouraged to appreciate and engage with the place God has given us. In the context of Israel, dwelling in the land was not only about living in a physical location, but also about enjoying God's covenant blessings and faithfully upholding His laws. David's call to dwell reflects a deep trust in God's provision and timing. He encourages believers to find satisfaction and security in God, trusting that He is aware of our needs and will provide for us in the place where He has planted us. Befriend faithfulness. The phrase befriend faithfulness suggests an intimate relationship with steadfastness, loyalty, and integrity. This isn't simply a call to be faithful in our actions. It's about making faithfulness a close companion, a trusted guide in our journey. Befriending faithfulness means committing ourselves to a life of integrity, honesty, and constancy. It implies nurturing a relationship with God that leads to trust and obedience, regardless of circumstances or the success of others. Faithfulness here serves as an antidote to envy and anxiety. By focusing on living faithfully, we guard our hearts against the corrosive effects of comparing ourselves to others, especially those who prosper despite wickedness. Befriending faithfulness means choosing a life that aligns with God's will, growing in patience and trust rather than allowing frustration or bitterness to take root. A call to consistent, purposeful living. Together, dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness is an invitation to a life of peace, stability, and purpose in God's presence. When David speaks of this in the context of the wicked's prosperity, He is reminding believers that our purpose is not found in chasing after the same gains that the wicked pursue, but in building a life that reflects God's values. David's guidance here echoes Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, where he urges his followers not to be anxious about worldly needs, but to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. The invitation to dwell and befriend faithfulness is about finding our ultimate security in God, regardless of what others around us may achieve or acquire. It is a call to live with patience and resilience, rooted in trust that God is just and faithful to those who commit their ways to him. In this way, David's prayer teaches us that true contentment and prosperity come not from outward success, but from a life centered on God. Dwell where God has placed you, befriend the path of faithfulness, and trust that his justice and provision will be seen in his perfect timing. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. David's encouragement to delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart, is central to his guidance on how to live faithfully in a world where the wicked often seem to prosper. This verse highlights a shift in focus from envying the fleeting success of the unrighteous to finding true fulfillment and joy in a relationship with God. Here's how this encouragement speaks to the struggle of seeing the wicked prosper and finding peace in God. Delight yourself in the Lord. To delight in God is an invitation to find our greatest joy, satisfaction, and pleasure in him rather than in material or worldly success. This command emphasizes a deep, personal relationship with God, where our happiness is rooted in his presence, his character, and his love. Delighting in the Lord means drawing close to him through prayer, worship, and meditation on his word, which strengthens our trust and helps us experience his peace and love. In the context of seeing the wicked prosper, this instruction redirects our focus away from external, material measures of success. Rather than being envious of what others gain through unjust means, we are invited to find our fulfillment in God. This delight in God shifts our values, helping us see that true joy isn't found in wealth or power, but in a relationship with the one who is constant and unchanging. God will give you the desires of your heart. When David speaks of God granting the desires of your heart, he isn't promising a life where every wish or want is fulfilled. Rather, he's teaching that when we delight in God, our desires begin to align with his will. The more we seek God and find joy in him, the more our hearts change to reflect his heart. Our desires become shaped by his goodness, love, and righteousness. This transformation means that our deepest longings shift from fleeting worldly ambitions to desires that are pleasing to God. When we delight in him, our hearts desire what he desires: justice, compassion, mercy, and love. In this way, God fulfills our desires by molding them to align with his perfect will and then granting them in his time and manner. We experience a deeper satisfaction and peace, knowing that our desires are now attuned to God's purpose. An antidote to envy and frustration, David's counsel to delight yourself in the Lord serves as a powerful remedy to the frustration of seeing the wicked prosper. By focusing on delighting in God, we lift our perspective beyond the temporary success of others and find lasting joy in our relationship with the Lord. We are reminded that the material achievements of the wicked are temporary and cannot compare to the eternal satisfaction and peace found in God's presence. A life aligned with God's will. David's prayer here encourages a life oriented toward God's values rather than worldly success. When we seek first the kingdom of God, we develop desires that are in harmony with his will. This alignment not only brings us peace, but also assures us that God is actively involved in fulfilling our heart's deepest, God-aligned desires. In essence, David's advice to delight yourself in the Lord is an invitation to a richer, more meaningful life than what the wicked's temporary success can offer. It encourages us to look beyond external appearances and invest in a relationship with God that brings true joy and fulfillment. When our joy and desires are centered on God, we find an enduring peace that no earthly success or failure can alter. This approach allows us to live in patience, trust, and contentment, confident that God knows and will provide for our deepest, most righteous desires in his perfect way.